call these people up and tell them I'll be late.
Okay, I'm rolling. You know, Tom, I want to just start out with you. I want to start out with, and if we can keep the, you know, try to move through it, keep very conversational. If we can, we're just shooting. You and I are just having a talk.
Lovely.
Tell me, how in the world did you get into Bollywood? Where did all that start?
It started as a young man in a small town in North India. And in those days, the only form of entertainment, the legal entertainment that is, were Hindi films. So I became hooked on Hindi films, and I said I wanted to be a Hindi film hero, which was the ultimate fantasy. Either you became a big cricket star, or you became a film actor. And I wasn't quite good enough at cricket to become a cricket star, so I said, let me try to become a film star. And I joined the Film Institute in Pune as a young man at 22 and studied there for 2 years. And in 1974, I found myself right here in this studio, shooting my first film.
You come from an American background, at least.
Right.
Tell me about that. What does that mean, an American background?
My father's parents came to India in 1916 as missionaries with the Presbyterian Church, and my father was born in what is now Pakistan in 1919. Then he went to Yale for his college, and near the end of his time at Yale, he met my mother, who was studying at Connecticut College for Women. She was born in, I believe, in Minnesota. Her father was a Congregationalist minister. So she'd never been in India in her life. My father and she met, they fell in love, they got married in the States. My father became a minister. He was in Tennessee for, I think, 2 years, where my sister was born. And then in 1946, they sailed for India from New York. And my mother arrived as a woman of 26 or so, 25, never having set foot outside of the United States, and suddenly she was in India. And she then proceeded to spend the next 25 years of her life, 35 years of her life in India.
When were you born, and what do you remember? What were your first kind of memories of India?
I was born in 1950 in Mussoorie, which is a hill station up north in the Himalayas, where we also studied for many years. My first memories are from when I was probably about 3, riding a tricycle, or trying to ride a tricycle and falling off. That's my first memory. I was born here, I was brought up here in India, and so India's been home for me since the day I was born, because I was born here. But we used to go back to America every 5 years for what was called furlough, which is a very military term, but it's also a missionary term. Missionaries were given a year of furlough after every 5 years to go back to, the States. And for that 1 year, my father would either teach or preach or write or do something. So the first furlough I remember was in 58. We were in Hamden, Connecticut, which is right outside of New Haven. My father was teaching at the Yale Divinity School. And my brother and I studied at a grade school, Putnam Avenue, grade school. And we were there for a year. And the next furlough was 63, 64 in Princeton, New Jersey. My father was working or teaching at the Theological Seminary in Princeton for that year. So coming back and forth to the States was a big, big deal for us to go there for a year and be able to watch television and eat Tootsie Rolls and have hamburgers and Cokes. And these were big, big things for us as little kids.
Hold on 1 sec.
Maybe losing sound?
I'm not losing sound, I'm getting a funny reception. So you have this you have this American background. You're obviously aware of it as you're growing up in India. What impact did that have on your life? What influence did it have on you as you were, from very young through your adolescence? How were you perceived?
Yeah, it's difficult to know how I was perceived. Looking back, I'm thinking of how I perceived myself. I think I mean, like very obvious things. I used to, like in the Olympic Games, I used to always root for the American team, you know, that they should do very, very well. But simultaneously, I rooted for the Indian team. And my sporting heroes were either Indians or Americans. I didn't sort of differentiate between the two. So I think I was a bit lucky growing up because my parents, my father had been born in India, so of course India was home for him also. But they never sort of told us that, you know, one country is better than the other or whatever. This issue was never, we were sort of at home in either country. And there was never any sort of comparison, even religious, on the religious side. My parents were extremely liberal. So we were never sort of taught that one country is better than another, one language is better than another. We were sort of, somehow we were given to learn or understand that everything in its own place is fine. And there were other missionaries who, American missionaries or British missionaries, who definitely never considered India their home. I mean, but I was lucky in that sense that my parents they were extremely happy in India. And I'm sure my father and my mother, after she came and settled, they considered both places their homes, that is USA and India.
Was there something about America, you know, that they brought with them that guided them? Was there something of a vision or a set of values that they brought with them?
I think it would be a combination of what they learned, because both of their parents were ministers. My grandfather on my father's side was a Presbyterian minister, on my mother's side was a Congregationalist minister. So there was a liberal, a sense of that a person can do what he or she wants to if one really tries hard enough. And the feeling that money is not the primary factor and that will bring you happiness. These are sort of almost like, whether they're American values or definitely sort of New England liberal values. And they never sort of came into conflict with whatever values we were picking up in India. But yes, I would say that these values definitely had an American or a Western edge to them. But as I've gone through my life here in India, I've realized more and more that these values exist in every single country. But I would say until I was 18 or 19, if someone had asked me what my nationality was, I would probably have said American. It was when I came back from college, I left college, came back here, and I knew that I wanted to spend the rest of my life here. That's when I said it's ridiculous to spend the rest of your life in a country holding a passport of another country. So then I gave up my American passport and took an Indian one. It was not a question of which is better, it was a question of where I wanted to spend the rest of my life, which was right here.
Why not in the United States?
It wasn't my home. I think that's the simplest answer. It wasn't my home. My home was India, the things that I really loved. The hills, cricket, the language, friends, they were all back in India. So it wasn't a value judgment, it was a judgment of, not even a judgment, it was a decision as to where my home was. And that was back in India.
So you spent several weeks here and there over the course of your life during various years here in America. What was that like? What were your impressions? What was the experience? What do you remember about those things? What are sort of the vivid memories you have of your childhood here?
As kids, when we used to come here, you have to remember that I'm talking about the 50s, when certain things like, very basic things like potato chips or candy bars, you didn't get them in India. So when you went to the States, just a thing like a packet of chips was like a big, big deal. Television didn't exist in India. Baseball didn't exist in India. So these are like very basic things which, as a kid, you're attracted to. Ice cream, like the big restaurant was Howard Johnson's in those days with 28 or 29 flavors. Now in India, you basically got one flavor, that was vanilla. So I'm talking about very basic things, but these are the things as a kid you remember. We led a fairly privileged life here in India in that we always had space. We had room to play and move about because we were brought up in the hills. So the crowded, you know, the human mass that is India, we were fairly much away from that as kids. So it wasn't a matter of going to America and suddenly seeing, oh my goodness, there's so much space, because we had space here also. So it was more a matter of little things, as I said, like television, food, movies, long highways, you know, you can drive at 80 miles an hour for 2 hours in a straight line. Just things like that which one remembers from childhood. Watching football or basketball on television, these things.
Tell me about being the American kid back here in India. How did the Indian kids treat you? How did your friends treat you?
You see, it's difficult. Because we spoke the language, any kid who knew us for more than half an hour realized that we weren't foreigners, that we lived in this country. It's the initial reaction, because obviously one has white skin. If you go to a place where they didn't know you, sometimes someone would pass a rude comment about the color of your skin or something. And as kids, used to get angry and fight with them. But the minute I spent, you know, even 15, 20 minutes with any kid, that kid would soon realize that. So one, I don't think, maybe superficially we were viewed as Americans or foreigners, but inside we were not. And once again, I would give credit to my parents for making, I mean, in our school in Missouri, Hindi was not a compulsory subject. But my parents insisted that we learn, we were already speaking Hindi, but written Hindi. They insisted that we learn the language, which we did, which was a bit unusual in those days. So it's you know, what you're asking, I can understand. In my case, but our case was a bit rare. Most of the time, I didn't even think that I was different than anybody else. And it was a rare occasion when some kid would, you know, tell me that, you know, you look like. There are a couple of, one pet phrase that kids always used to shout at us. They used to call us Lal Bandar. Now, Lal Bandar means red monkey. And because like when we would go out in the sun, or your faces, we'd get sunburnt, which is, Indians can't get sunburnt because they're not fair skinned. So this was the ultimate taunt, was when we got called. But that was happened maybe once or twice a year, and we'd always shout something back at them equally, probably even more rude than that, and this would start a fight, and we'd shout at each other, and we'd be friends in 15 minutes. So it's difficult to describe, but we led a life in which we really didn't feel like outsiders. We may have looked like outsiders, but we didn't feel like outsiders.
So that's very interesting then. You were actually then brought into the fold a little bit.
That's
so
right.
and I think that's one of the really interesting, unique things about your perspective. From the fold,
Yep.
an Indian,
Yep.
seeing the development of your own country, that is India,
Right.
in the, in the latter half of the 20th century. And I'm curious then, if, as someone from within that fold, how did the Indians that you grew up with, how did they perceive America? What was it to them?
Well, if you go back far enough, like into the late 60s, America was the ultimate fantasy. And it was a fantasy which very, very few people could actually reach. But it was a fantasy which one could see, especially in Hollywood movies. Hollywood movies have always been extremely popular in India. That was pre-television, so young Indian men or women would go see a Hollywood movie. And that for them was America, and they would fantasize about it. And for them to actually get there was like getting to the moon. And certain American products like hamburgers or Coke or chips, these represented to them Fantasyland. And but it was only, say, by the late or middle 80s when more and more Indian young people realized that they could actually make it to the States, and they started to. And then in the 90s, what happened was that all those products which they'd fantasized about for years, like Nike shoes and Levi jeans, they were all made available right here in India. And the fantasy was broken. It's amazing.
You talk about these products,
Yeah, yeah.
American commercial culture,
That's
and
right,
yet those
that's
are fairly materialistic, shallow
Yep.
perceptions or wants. Certainly, there was some depth to the vision of America. Can you talk
I
about
think
that a little
the
bit?
depth would have been in an individual is given space to think on his or her own. Education did not mean just memorizing textbooks. Education meant thinking. Education meant challenging yourself. A certain, I think individuality was what, in Americans, is what Indians looked up to. Because most Indians were all bound in either religious binding or cultural binding or family binding. It was very difficult for an individual to say, I don't want to do what I'm being told to do. I want to do what I want to do. It was very difficult, whereas they felt that an American could do that. Any American could do that. And I think this is what appealed beyond, as you said, the materialistic hamburgers and hot dogs, was this feeling that if you went to America, you could be an individual. You could do what you really wanted to do. You would not be told that you had to do this. This is what America meant. The freedom in America meant this, that you could be what you wanted to be. And that included financial freedom, that if you worked hard enough, you would get rewarded for what you did. And this is what I think, in the end, really attracted Indians to America, the feeling of individual freedom, not democracy or religious freedom, but individual freedom, that in America an individual can reach his or her potential. That's what I think it was.
Is there something specific, since you've been so perfectly in touch with it, is there something specific to the Indian spirit that lends itself to individualism? I don't know, I wouldn't want to drag in other cultures, but since you know Indian culture so well, what is it about the Indian and his spirit that makes individualism compelling?
Because individualism in India is often very hard to reach or fulfill. And yet at the same time, because India has got so many multiple cultures, so a young person is exposed to religions, languages, thoughts, attitudes of all different sorts. That's on one side. On the other side, he or she is told that you have to live the rest of your life within these bound confines. So you're exposed on one side, and the other side you're confined. So I think this is why Indians always have been fascinated by individuality and individual growth. It's the being able to see what's there and then at the same time not being allowed to reach it. So it's that dichotomy which makes Indians very fascinated with individuality and also with, therefore, America, rather than other countries.
So is there, are you saying that there's a heritage, there's a pent-up heritage, there was a suppression of an individuality in India? What was the change?
I think the number of Indians who could become individuals were so small, such a small sliver of an upper class who were allowed to break free, and they were the people eventually who, when India became a free country, they were the ones who became the leaders. Like Nehru, for instance, was a total individual. Gandhi was a total individual, because they had views that were running contrary to what millions of people thought, and they became the leaders. So of free India, this was the idol. I mean, the ideal was a man like Nehru, who was secular, who could speak 3-4 languages, who was at home in the East and the West, which is what 99% of Indians could not be. But here was this man who was their idol, their ideal. And I think a whole generation of Indians at that time in the 50s and 60s grew up thinking that we can never become Nehru, but that's what we should become. And then afterwards, when the market opened up and communication opened up, media opened up, the young Indians said, well, why can't I? And that's what we're in now, this whole generation saying, well, why should I just think that that man is great? Why can't I become like that man? So you've got an entire generation for the last 10, 15 years of young Indians who say, well, why should I just say that that person is great? Let me become that person. And that's why India has just done a complete turnabout over the last 10, 15 years. And it's a fascinating turnabout, fascinating.
how much of that would you attribute to just the existence, the existence of America?
I think in America and American television, American products, American thought, American magazines have had a fantastic influence, amazing influence. Superficial level and also underneath, as we said earlier, at the individual level. The inspiration from America was, as I said, you can be an individual. But now what's happened is that in India now, if you're a young person, you can become an individual now because things have opened up. So that inspiration from America is less because now they don't need it. They can become, like Bombay is America, you can come to Bombay and become an individual. So there's no need to go to New York to become an individual. Whereas previously you had to go to New York or Los Angeles to become an individual. So that's changed now in the last 10, 15 years. So America is a fantasy. It's much, much less of a fantasy than it used to be. And as an ideal that this is the way, this individualism, America showed the way, but now that America has shown the way, now young people today actually don't need America because everything is right here in India. So it's interesting.
You don't think that we talk about individualism. Are there any other, are there any other values related to that are American values or that come to mind when, what comes to mind other than we've talked about products and we've talked about individualism? What other values are there that you think are appealing to some of the kids today? To some of the people today, anyone?
I think these are the major issues. Things like, again, talking about free trade and free enterprise and democracy, those are now so firmly entrenched in the Indian psyche that America is not, as I said, is not needed to be an example. I mean, we've got them now in India. So it's interesting, not that America is being discarded, but the role of America as an ideal and as an inspiring fantasy has really, really become much less strong. And now an Indian person wants to go there for, say, education, possibly go there and make a lot of money. But that pursuit of being an individual, it's now just so much more possible in India. So the role of America has become much, much less. And then, of course, I mean, America itself has, well, we can go into details in this, but over the last 2-3 years, certain things have happened in America's foreign policy, which has made Indians think, one second, is this America that we fantasized about, is it still going in the right direction? Is freedom being challenged in America? Is individuality no longer so easy in America? Is democracy really a value that America is really supporting? Because America is supporting countries which are not democratic at all. So there are questions, a lot of questions are being raised about America's role now at many different levels. And wise, intelligent questions, not just, propagandist questions, but questions saying, one second, maybe we've got things we can offer to America now. Maybe as America deals with different religions, different languages, maybe we're the role model that America should look at India now. How does India deal with different languages and religions? So it's a very interesting, things have balanced out in the last 10, 15 years.
Is that your opinion, or do you think, I think, how much do you think the great body, we're talking about, 1 billion people, how much do you think that these notions of where America is, it's I wouldn't say, you didn't say run its course, but has taught what it's going to teach? How much do you think that has pervaded all of India? Or are we just talking about a fairly narrow echelon of India and Indians?
I don't think it's a very narrow echelon. I think it's getting wider by the day. And it goes right down into the villages, because now villagers are watching television 24 hours a day, and they see, what's going on in the world, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or 9/11, they see it now. And they think, they're not just, they have a much wider worldview because of what they're watching than maybe a farmer in Kansas. And I'm not trying to pick on Kansas, just as an example. I think the gap, not a gap, this thinking about what is really true and what is right is much, much deeper now than it was 10, 15 years ago. And I mean, I really think it's time for all of us to learn from all of us. I don't think that any one country now has got all the answers. It's a combined answer now. And America has done tremendous, has provided tremendous leadership in the world post World War II. And even during the freedom struggle, America was a tremendous inspiration to India. But I think now that, I really think it's balancing out, and I think now people should sit down and say, let's get together, what can we do, not what can India do, what can America do, what can Russia do, what can Iraq do. It's what we as a world can do. And that is the only solution in the long run. Now, I think if America relaxes a little bit and gets a much deeper world vision, America can play a tremendous role in this type of thinking. But I just think that as America follows a course of world, attempt at world dominance, they're going to lose what I think has made America great. That is the ability to listen, ability to accept. That is getting less in America. People are looking at America with less and less, not admiration, but America is being questioned. Is this the right way? And America wasn't questioned. I mean, America was questioned by intellectuals, but it wasn't questioned by the common man. America is now being questioned by the common man in India. That is this really where we want to head, the direction we want to head? And that's a challenge for America, and it's a challenge for India. For a country which is blindly, not blindly, but with such enthusiasm followed the American way, for them now to say, one second, is this absolutely correct? I think it's a fascinating moment in history right now that we're going through.
So what does India then have to teach America?
I think the main lesson, which is how you actually deal with people of different religions and different languages and different colors and different cultures. You see in India, like in Bombay, you've been in Bombay. In a course of 24 hours, you will rub shoulders with, if not work with, people of a different religion than you, people who speak a different language than you, people that look totally different than you. And you're living with them, you're working with them, you're accepting them. This is what America has to learn from India, that you can deal with more than one language. We're dealing with about 27 official languages. America is having trouble dealing with 2. So you have to, in the end, Spanish, and you might maybe some other language like Italian, Polish, let those languages be spoken in America, because that's what we do. And it's a challenge, and it's also starting to rain. So we're in the middle of the monsoons, and we've got a fantastic rain here. So I think the question now is not one country cannot say this is the way to do things. It's we have to get together and think what is the way that all of us can follow together. That's what I feel.
So do the Indian youth that you deal with,
yes.
do the folks that you deal with, do they aspire to an American lifestyle?
Less and less.
Well,
because the American lifestyle has reached us. I'm not saying they still aspire to that lifestyle, but that lifestyle is now not, as I said before, not only in New York, it's right here in Bombay. And you can get all those products I talked about. You can get all the freedom of expression, whether it's sexual or intellectual or philosophical. It's all right here in Bombay. I'm not saying it's in all of India, but it's more and more, it's spreading throughout the country. So it's not that they rejected the American lifestyle, it's that the American lifestyle is now available right here in India. So there's no need to. And then the next step is, once you've accepted something, is to question it. Is it right? And that's also happening. So it's very, very fascinating.
So we have a fairly generalized notion of what America is. On the good side, we have some democracy, we have individualism, and what's on the bad side? Because it's always a double-edged sword.
Yeah. I think, I wouldn't say it bad, but the problem side is that America lives not in a fool's paradise, but lives in a paradise. And they really don't know what the rest of the world is thinking or what the rest of the world's problems are. But if you're wanting to be a world power, which America has been and wants to be more and more, you have to know what the Iraqis are thinking. What do they really want? I mean, do they want you in there? You have to really be thinking about that. And the British ran an empire in which they didn't have to think about that because they already knew. But the average American, when you've got 140,000 troops in another country, what is that country really like? Do they have a soccer team? What is their big sport? What do they like to eat? What are their films? Who are their favorite film stars? What language do they speak? Do boys and girls make love before marriage? These things you have to know, you have to feel, you have to realize that these are human beings over there. Like your hero may be Shaq, they may have a football hero as big as Shaq for them. So they can't just think that these are some not uneducated people who are just non-thinking entities. No, these are people who lead a life which is very similar to yours. They have the same problems.
Why are Americans like that? I mean, you're talking about a country that's as wealthy and as individualistic as they get. Why in the world would people choose to remain ignorant like that?
Because they have everything they want within the borders of their country. So they have no need to go out and think what the world is doing. Everything is there. And whereas a country like India has had countries coming and going, cultures coming and going, invaders coming and going, the British Raj came, the Mughals. It's just India's been in a state of constant flux. But it's fine, and there's nothing wrong with being happy in yourself. But if you're really planning to go out and change the world, as America wants to do in Afghanistan and Iraq, is the most recent examples, you have to know who are these people. Do they want to be changed? Do they want you in their country? You have to think about these things. And if you're taking on this role of a world leader. So the average American, because you've got the average American, 140,000 average Americans in there as troops. The average American has to think. Now, Iraq, simple thing. The Iranian crisis, the name of the country is Iran. The name of the country is Iraq. Now, we say Hindi for America is America. Now, an American, if in his country we're calling the country America, American is not going to like it. He's going to say, man, my country is America, not America. It's the same thing. It's not Iraq. It's Iraq. That's the name of their country. It's not the Iranian crisis, it's the Iranian crisis. Small things. Like 9/11, the tragedy of 9/11. 9/11 in the rest of the world is the 9th of November. But will an American ever think that? No. It's the 11th of September, but for the rest of the entire world, it's the 9th of November. Now, were the Twin Towers blown apart on the 9th of November? No. So the rest of the world, it's something to think about.
I'd like to get back to that. We were talking a little bit yesterday, fascinating discussion about two women who had come to perform a play with you. You were rehearsing this play.
Right.
And you made comments about these two women
Right.
and how different this situation was than it might have been 10 years before.
Right.
What was different?
Yeah.
And why?
Two young ladies in this play were rehearsing in our house yesterday. I think you shot some of it also. First thing was what they were wearing. One woman was wearing, very beautiful women, wearing a very tight pair of jeans and a short blouse. The other one was wearing some wraparound skirt and again a short blouse. And very comfortable in it. They're not 10, 12 years ago, they might have worn something like that in the privacy of their own house, but they never would have gone out like this. So the confidence of young women in India that they're beautiful and they can show it off, there's no problem. This didn't exist publicly 10, 12 years ago. The second was the way they spoke. They were in someone else's house, the house just happened to be mine, and I was more than twice their ages. But there was no sort of the formality of getting up and greeting me in a very formal way. They were very informal with me, which is fantastic. I think it's absolutely beautiful. But 10, 15 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. with that same age gap. The girls would have been much more circumspect in what they said. They wouldn't have, I mean, certain words, whether they're, foul language or certain very graphic descriptions of things, they were saying yesterday without even thinking that they were saying anything which they would consider wrong. So this whole opening up of individuality, as we were saying before, these young women are individuals, and they don't care if you approve of them or don't. They're happy being what they are, which is again a very American thing. So
would you say they got that from America? If America didn't exist?
I think it's the result of a lot of American television, which has been shown here for the last 10, 12 years. It's a lot of more frequent visits to America and back. And it's all opened up, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally. And that individuality of the young, especially women, is so strong now. And as I said, if that same rehearsal had been done in my house 10, 12 years ago, they would have been wearing either Indian clothes or a very loose pair of jeans and a very loose T-shirt. Certainly not a figure-hugging thing like they were wearing yesterday. And I think it's great. I mean, but this change has all happened in the last 10, 12 years.
I really would like to get and examine more of the career and the Bollywood and what you've been doing. But I would like to ask, you have said you are more Indian. You are Indian, more Indian than American. Your background is American. As you're going day to day now, you've got the Iraq situation, but let's say even before that,
Yeah.
You're interacting daily with Indians who are talking about America, and certainly negative attitudes come out. How do you deal with those negative attitudes? How do you, if you know something is wrong, do you correct it?
If I know they're making a generalization about anything, not only America, but anything, I will say that in my opinion this is wrong. And but my whole thing about, how can I say this? I have viewed myself, not even as an Indian or American, I view myself as an individual. And I view myself as an individual who's been born and brought up in India. This is my home. So I bristle when somebody makes a value statement judged purely on nationality. I bristle whether that's an Indian or American or Vietnamese, anybody who says this is right because this particular country is doing it. I say, no, is it right because is it right or wrong? Not because one particular country is doing it. So if an Indian makes a generalization that this is great because India is doing it, I say, wait a second, is it really so great just because India is doing it? Or is it really so bad just because America is doing it? Look into it. What really is going on? That is, you'll find the answer, not in the fact that it's American or Indian, but you'll find an answer in whether it's right or wrong.
What are some of the stereotypes, if you had to list them, because they're everywhere. Everybody has stereotypes.
Absolutely.
We have stereotypes. That is to say, Americans would have stereotypes about Indians.
Yep.
First of all, I'd like to ask, how do you think Indians react to those American stereotypes about them? What do you think that?
We are getting more and more upset. I mean, we get more and more hassled when Indians are dealt with in stereotypical fashion.
A character Apu from The Simpsons, for example.
Right.
How do the Indians react to that?
People get upset.
Well, what upsets them? What is it specifically about?
The lack of sensitivity. And there's been some recent examples of Hindu gods appearing on T-shirts or on sandals in USA. And I think 10 years ago, no one would have said anything. But now people are saying, hold on a second. Would you like Jesus to be on a pair of sandals? Or would you like the president of, you like Bush on a pair of underwear? You've got Gandhi, some figure of Gandhi had come on some underwear or something. So people are saying, hold on a second, just think what you're doing. That's what I was saying previously, sensitivity. And I'll just give you another example which, again, may not make sense, but World Series, I mean, I'm a baseball fanatic, I was watching the World Series. Now it's called the World Series, so it's World Series, okay? But one national anthem is played, and one flag is flown, that's America. And the Yankees, or when they won last year, the other team, who won? Florida. Who won? Florida, right? Out of 9 players, 2 were American. Okay? So yet, the American flag is flown. Why can't the national anthems of every single nationality playing baseball be played at the beginning of the World Series? What's the problem? These are the things, the very small things, but
You never start the game.
Fine, you wait, give it another half an hour. Then if you call it the World Series, play the national anthems with all these guys. I think it'd be fantastic. No one's going to mind. I think the average American would love it. Fly other flags. When we play cricket matches between India and Australia, no matter where the ground is, both flags are always flown at the ground. There's the Indian flag, there's the Australian flag, and there's the flag of the local club. Always, always. And I think, I'm just giving you a small example of a very basic, mundane thing, but that's what the world sees. And these are the things that America must be aware of, and because the world's eyes are on America, America's eyes may not be on the world, but the entire world is watching so closely everything that America does. America is not aware of this. That when the World Series game is being played in New York, it's being